your attention. If you so choose to do a poll here the next week or two, which we have availability, which would be good, because we want to complete it before Thanksgiving. We have our next sample ready to go, another 300 registered voters to go ahead and do that if Julie gives us a call and says the board would like to do that. We are going to force that decision. There won't be five layers of options. It'll be a yes or no, not even an undecided. We just really want to know what their initial thoughts are in terms of that. So that's really going to be the biggest thing is really testing out more of the ballot language that could be provided when they see that coming up. So, you know, we had a nice soft correlation of what that dollar amount was with the dollars per month and dollars per year. Well, you know, if that translates out into $40 million, you know, that's the number they're really going to see when they go cast their vote. So we want to make sure that they see both sides of that equation and that they can make that connection that the you know, $180 a year or whatever it was is the $40 million number. Because sometimes that gets lost in translation. We just want to make sure that's very clear. And that gives you still time to tweak the language, the campaign, architecture, which, as I mentioned before, and I think Kim did last time, that really is very, very, very important. This site, how it's going to function, the feeling and look of the building is probably more important than anything else. So not to put the pressure on the architect, but it really needs to hit a home run. Because if they don't assimilate to the new direction, they're going to definitely turn off into your initiative. So more so than anything else, that is really the one big message that Kim and I got, is that, you know, as much as we've had community input meetings and you've done a great job kind of laying that groundwork, the folks that we talk to still don't have a lot of that information. And they're hungry to see that to make that decision. So that's going to be very, very important to get that moving along. So if you do it now, that gives you a lot of opportunities in the next 6 to 8 weeks to sort of see where you are and make tweaks to dollar amounts, the design, or the time frame that you'd like to do. Now, if you choose to do it in January, February, like a lot of our clients, you know, if you've already made that decision, it's on the ballot, we will give you more of an opinion on what the likelihood of passing would be. Same kind of format, but it would be more of, you know, there's not a lot of time to adjust your strategies based on something given to you in February and people are actually doing early voting and everything else. So, you know, it doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room to make, you know, some of the changes that you may want to make in terms of the information. So I can give this to Julie. This would be sort of a new script. And I don't think we have to go through it tonight, but it's very short and sweet. I think there's 9 copies in there. Okay. We'd have to validate the dollar amount, you know, for 35 million, 40 million, 20 million, whatever the dollar amount's going to be, based on your design team and your CM and what they're projecting the budget would be that you need to make the project a success. So that would be the next round of questions. Certainly we could probably add a few more, but it gets tighter and tighter in terms of measuring down the data. Now that we have a baseline, we can go back and compare, you know, from September to November or January. So it gives us that baseline. You can have it.
Actually, I'm keeping, Deb, would you take one for Lisa Schmidt?
And I can send this electronically as well, but I just wanted to have something so you kind of see the flavor of the question. So as we sort of narrow down the scope, it gets more and more specific. We remove a lot of the options of giving them an out. We really want to force their hand and have them sort of tell us exactly how they would vote if it was voted on today.
One of the things that Todd and I had discussed was the idea of possibly waiting until January and sending out that first round of informational campaign. We've been talking about what our next steps are and how we are going to launch an informational campaign. The biggest piece of that is we need to finalize things like dollars. And a lot of the questions that they were getting were about those exact, they want definitive answers. And until we get through the remainder of the planning process, we don't have those definitive answers yet. So it makes it very difficult to roll out an informational campaign when their biggest questions are as yet unanswerable. So my recommendation would be to wait until January and possibly do that after the first, we've tentatively budgeted for 2 mass mailings about this. We found that our constituency responds well to our newsletter
Absolutely.
as their main information source. So we're really glad we put that budget placeholder in there, knowing that we would want to do something large-scale informational. To be able to do that first informational mailing with the answers to those basic questions, maybe do a poll at that point and see what the remaining questions are before we send out the second round of mailing. It would put us on a really tight timeline though, so.
And I can just give you some insight into what other clients have done, and they've done exactly that, Julie. They've sort of got the baseline, they know the issues, they craft the messages going out, they let it sort of simmer, and then they usually come back and do another poll closer to the actual time people would vote. And that still gives you the option to get one more piece out, because we will still gather all the
Yeah.
information, and people are very vocal.
Yeah.
Kim did all the phone, I mean, we take every piece of information they give us, and sometimes they love to give us as much information as we can sort of handle. If it takes 50 minutes, it takes 50 minutes. But we report all that back to you, and that'll give you insight into maybe that one last push to see where it's going to go. So.
And if anybody wants to read through them, Kim takes copious notes, and I have the actual
Yeah, you have all the actual
surveys.
data.
I have the actual data in a giant pile in my office, so feel free to flip through them. They're so interesting.
It's good information. So I mean, you're on a good track. It's just there are some outlying things that are on your registered voters' minds that they are hungry for that specific flavor of what you're going to do. So generally they are relatively supportive, but as most folks, until they see the details, the devil's in the details, and then they will sort of make up their mind. So.
And in light of the fact that we really haven't had any mass release of information of the kind that they are looking for,
Yeah.
I don't know that doing a poll next week is going to show us a whole lot different than what we've seen, other than to force them to make a choice. But without seeing the information, I would be afraid that their choice might lean toward the negative, not having seen anything new.
I think that's a great assumption.
So that's my read on that. I did want to ask you, the 27% positive, 23% negative, is that generally in line with similar polling that you have done currently?
It's usually the first one we do, and it's historically, it is about a third. Now, I just took the real hardcore supporters and the real hard oppositions, and then
Right.
you have, the 26% undecided, and you kind of got the soft yeses. I kind of lumped those three together because they still could sort of meander around into where they would like to go. Even though they said they are generally supportive, they may change their mind, and some of those may change their mind to be on the positive. So I know we have, basically the two sides, and then we have the 50% in the middle. So traditionally, yes, you're sort of right where most folks would expect at this point.
Okay.
And so, the magic I can tell back to you is forcing their hand and telling them specifically, it's 50-50 or it's 60-40 or 70-30. So then you kind of really know where you're at in terms of how much information you get out, the level of detail, how much effort you need to put in to keep the the momentum of the campaign.
Right.
If you're 70-30, if you lay down a little bit, if it's 50-50, then you really have to go all the way to the end, just like any other candidate.
Right.
We got to campaign to the very last minute to make our case.
And if you look, this is also on page 83 of your packet, which is page 13 of the report. That is question 7, voter support on possible referendum if election held today. And that's where the 23-27 come from on the definitely for, definitely against. But you can see where those probablys fall
Right,
in
those are much
there.
more.
Yeah, and you can see from the multiple times we asked that, it gets a little more positive in terms of them understanding, just by Kim giving a little more insight into the things that you're looking to do.
Right.
So just that effect had, a positive outcome. Not huge, but it did make a difference in the numbers. And so going for the lower dollar amount made no difference.
Right.
We tested those two
And that
sort
was
of
really-
solutions. So that didn't move the needle at all. So that was a little surprising. And then we sort of looked at, obviously, the support if you had children in your household or if you're under 55. So, if you have children in your household and if you're under 55, generally a little bit more supportive of the initiative. And that just totally makes sense. So yeah, so the last question was really going through it. So that's really the most important one. After they're educated slightly on the phone, that didn't really didn't know what you guys are up to. That is sort of the key question that we want to double check with the next one.
Well, those who are our neighbors here, and you're saying those closest, would they perhaps feel slighted that they weren't consulted, or is there some element of that?
Maybe I'll let you answer that because you actually spoke to most of them. But I mean, I don't really have any.
Because they have a large percentage of undecided. I don't think so, because if you look at one of the other maps, it says that it's about a third, and a third that are for it. So what I'm thinking is, again, they just are speaking, a lot of things that came up were with design, like Todd said, with the architecture, with the money issue, everything. They don't want state of the art. They want to make sure that there's some integrity with the design in the community, things like that. So I think that, and it kept coming across that no big, huge, expenditure of things they don't need. They do want improvements. They do want some design, but more functionality, I think, than.
I think they're hungry for a well-functioning building, and the challenges of this building, and I mean the community recognizes that very strongly. So that's why I'm saying how the new building is going to be laid out, the floor plan, the elevations, all the details, because they really want it to be dramatically different than this facility with the additions and just the generally funkiness of the building, if I can use a technical term.
But they want the integrity of the small town feel, the design, the architecture. They're also very concerned about the parking.
The site planning is.
I know we couldn't say a whole lot about that,
But
but that's an issue.
So I just think also that the folks surrounding this, just so you just know that they're the ones that have the most immediate impact as far as the renovation. They're the closest to your facility, so they're probably the most concerned. So they obviously have a little more reservations. So they haven't seen a lot of those details. So that's probably why that's a little slightly higher from an undecided perspective.
Well, I
Is
think
there
we have
also
a-
potentially a demographic overlay on that?
I didn't really get into a lot of demographic splits, but we could take a
I'm
look
just
at
wondering,
that.
because as we go further out, those are some of our newer subdivisions, and
Younger
I wonder
families.
if maybe it's younger families, families with children that are a little bit further out, which
Could be.
we know from your data are more supportive.
Right.
And so if that
We could
matches
take a look
up
at
a
that.
little bit,
That's
that
a good
might
question.
provide some more explanation.
We can do some data mining and get you kind of the demographic within 1 mile and then how they feel about
I
that.
think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we can definitely do
Yeah,
that.
because the downtown, I think, could be a very different demographic than our overall.
That's my guess.
Yeah, we can dig a little deeper in that and get you some answers on that. Not a problem.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to hearing from you,
All
Julie,
right.
and we'll get everything teed
Yeah,
up,
give
so.
us a chance to look over the.
Yeah, that's
talk
fine.
and-
We're not in a big hurry. We're just that those are sort of your options, and we're happy to roll another one and sort of give you a little more prediction of how the outcome might be.
Sure.
And it segues perfectly into Nagel Hartwright Architects. A lot of the things that Kim and Todd have said reflect exactly the kinds of things that the staff have talked about, that the public have talked about in our public meetings, that they want something that will fit with the downtown. They don't want to lose the warm and welcoming feel of our library, because it's one of the things we like most about it.
Well, you have a lot of charm in this area, and I think they're concerned that we don't lose the charm.
I can do charm in a bigger building, I promise.
I think that's their hope. I think that's their hope.
Should we get started?
All right, take it away, Don.
So, actually, this is a good night for us to be here and hear the discussion that we just heard. I'm glad actually that we heard it before we made our presentation. Because
You
I
gonna
think
change
we-
on the fly now?
Yeah, in a way.
All right,
And I
great.
think, no, and I think, actually that's very helpful for us. I think, frankly, we always come to these projects hoping that the referendum vote is going to be a matter of deciding about the services that you provide to the community. The thing we don't want is for this to become a beauty contest,
Right.
right? Where the vote is based on, whether, now, we also understand the other perspective. If I'm agreeing to increase my taxes, I want to see what I'm getting for it. So we understand that as well. So I think we're coming here tonight to report on our progress, kind of where we're at. We had a very good, I thought, joint community, public meeting recently, and we're going to report on the results of that, which I think are very positive with respect to some of the things that we've heard about tonight. And then the second thing that we're going to talk about is, okay, what do we do now? And coming here tonight, we thought that our focus should shift a little bit from design towards some other issues that have come up, and we'll talk about those later. But it's interesting to hear the perspective tonight that no, design still has to be a primary focus going forward. So we'll talk, just to give you a little context, going through this. So what I'm going to start by talking about the Joint Citizens Task Force and Community Review that we had. And there were 3 board members there, Jason, Pat, and Lisa were there, and Jimmy was there, of course. And the attendance was probably
About a dozen.
a dozen people.
Well, a dozen members of the public. There were some staff members, there were our trustees, Graham and Mark were there, so.
Okay, so what we presented to them was basically the presentation that we gave to the board last time they were here. I'm not going to go through these in detail. They're the same images that we presented to the board the last time that we were here. And after we went through the images that we presented to the board, the other thing that we did since the last board meeting was take a closer look at some of the detailing downtown, on the buildings downtown, and started to talk about that. And that's one thing I want to spend a little bit of time tonight talking about with the board, because those who weren't at the meeting, this is something that we haven't talked to you about yet. So I'm going to go through a series of photographs of buildings that are along Lockport Street, basically, and talk about some of the detailing and how we think this will factor into our development of the design as we go forward. So you may remember, the last time we presented the design, we showed you some brick patterning and things like that, without being specific about it, basically just saying these are kind of placeholders for things that we want to develop as we go forward. So in this first image here, the building on the left, and I apologize, I forget the name of this building every time I look at it, it's the one that's being
Trolley
renovated. Yes, that's being renovated right now. So this has a what is very similar to what's known as a Chicago common brick on it. It has kind of a salmon warm kind of color to it, kind of soft edges. It has a very different character than a lot of the bricks on the buildings that you see along Lockport Street. The other thing that I want to point out here is the image on the right-hand side, which captures 3 of the buildings along Lockport Street. These are also buildings on the north side of the street, which means that they get the south sunlight that hits them. And one of the things, there's a huge difference in looking at the buildings on the north and south sides of the street. The buildings that get the sunlight on them, all that brick detailing comes to life because of the shadows that are created by the sunlight hitting them, right? And you don't get that on the north side of the building. So I think that's very relevant to some of the work that we're doing on the library building. Having its primary facade face south, there's a real opportunity here to get some of that richness in the library building as well. You also see there's a wide range of bricks that are used. So there are many of these red brick buildings, and then you have the lighter colored bricks as well. Looking a little bit closer at some of the details, this starts to get into some of the ways that we would start to think about developing the detail on the library building. And there's a wide range. There's not any one style that's prevalent along the street. And they range from the building on the right-hand side, which is the Italian restaurant building. It has a very dark brick. It's a really rich brick. It's a brick that we think really looks great. We cannot imagine it on the library building. It's really nice on a small building facade like that, but it's really a nice, rich brick. The other thing about the detailing on that building that is interesting is it's fairly flat. So if you look at the cornice line at the top there, those projections are not very great compared to some of the other things that you see. But it still has a real richness, and that kind of simplicity is carried through in the way they deal with the window openings. So the way the stone lintel is kind of flush with the wall on either side of it. There's a kind of simplicity to it that has a kind of elegance, by virtue of its simplicity. The image in the center, which captures two of the more ornate buildings, I would say, kind of side by side, shows a very different approach to the brick detailing there. And I want to compare this in a way to the one that you see all the way on the left, which is on the south side of the building. It doesn't get the benefit of that south sunlight. So I think, unfortunately, some of the brick detailing there gets lost a little bit, but there's actually something about it that we find really interesting in thinking about how do you start to think about projecting brick faces out from other brick faces. This is a fairly tricky thing to do in construction because you have to be careful of the water that sits on brick ledges that, you know, kind of project and things like that. And so you see in the image in the center, the building on the left is actually, we think, done very well because you don't get any of those horizontal surfaces that catch the water, right? Everything kind of steps out as you go up, and then the whole thing is capped by a cornice, a capping up on top, so you don't get that kind of detailing. And the way they do that is what's known as corbelling, where they have those series of bricks that kind of step out in order to get those kind of deep recesses that they have there. The building on the right is, we think, a little more dangerous approach to brick detailing because you do get several horizontal surfaces that are exposed to the weather above. And so it has a rich character as well. We think in terms of long-term maintenance and things like that, it's a little riskier. The building on the left, the one that's in the shadow, is actually, we think, very interesting the way they took the bricks and rotated the bricks 45 degrees, which allows you to stick the brick out above it without getting a horizontal surface on top of it. So I think as we start to look at this detailing, we're considering it's not just a matter of decoration, so to speak. It's not just a matter of aesthetics. It's also thinking about the functionality. I mean, you know, we talk about, one of the things that we emphasized in going through the floor plans at the recent meeting was the functionality of the floor plans. There's a kind of pragmatic approach, a kind of adaptability and flexibility. So we really want to emphasize those features of the library building. And I'm glad that it's already kind of recognized in the public realm that some of those things are lacking in what you have right now. So we want to emphasize those things, but that same attitude applies to the way you deal with the outside of the building as well. This is not just an exercise in kind of decorating the outside. There's a functional consideration to it as well. And then these are some images of other buildings that we have done, and I put these in here really to show you kind of a range about how brick can be used in different ways. And they range from the one on the left, which is a multicultural center at a university. The brick there is a lighter colored brick, but it has a lot of range to it. So, you know, one of the things you notice in the buildings on Lockport Street, the bricks are all fairly monochromatic, right? On any given building, you've got a red brick. You don't get kind of a blend of different colors of brick. The one on the left that we're showing here does have that kind of blend. The one in the center is a convent building. It has a more residential character. It also has this kind of warm colored brick. The one on the right is another university building for a museum of world cultures where, because of the artifacts exhibited inside, it had to be basically a windowless building. We wanted to express something of what was happening inside, and so we used brick patterning as a way of saying something about it. So the patterning that you see here is actually taken from historical ornamental patterns of different cultures from around the world, and it was a way of getting some of that detail in the building. So there are a lot of things that can be done with brick to start to add this kind of complexity and detail. Here are some other examples. These are different ways of using stone. The one on the left is a detail that we put into a village hall that we did up in Lincolnshire, and they have this little three-leaf detail that's part of their logo, and so we put that in as ornament around the building. The one in the center is the multicultural center at the university, and then some other brick patterning that you see as well. So I think this is our next step in terms of the design process, because when we got the public feedback for everything that we had shown at the last meeting, and those who were there, correct me if I've got this wrong somehow or if I missed something along the way, but generally we thought that with respect to the design that we presented, the response was very positive. And here's kind of a list of some of the things that we heard. The curved glass facade had a very nice openness to it and seemed very positive. That was very well received. The materials that were proposed and the detail that we showed, that was viewed as being positive. Now, we didn't have all the details figured out, but we talked about the same things that we just talked about in terms of the masonry detailing and those kind of things, and that resonated with people as well. When we talked about the different brick colors, we are thinking, given the size of the building that you're putting in here, that the softer, kind of warmer colored brick is more appropriate than some of that kind of hard-faced brick that you see on a lot of the downtown buildings. And I think because if you imagine a brick like that on a building the scale of what we're talking about for the library, our concern is that it's going to have a kind of institutional character. And that's not what we want. I think what we're going for is something that fits in more to kind of the residential area that you have here, has a kind of warmer character to it as well. And we talked about that with the group that we met with, that seemed to resonate with them as well. We seemed to buy into that idea as well. There was also some talk, we didn't talk specifically about sustainable design approaches to this, but that this is an interest of some of the people who were at the meeting. And I think, that's a decision that we need to make. We don't have to make today. We can make this decision down the road, right? The degree to which we are going to design for sustainability. Now, it's becoming common in our industry that it's becoming just a way that we go about designing. But then there are programs, like the LEED program, where you get certification at different levels that you can choose to participate in or not, or things like that. So those are things that we can talk about down the road. We're happy to talk about them now if you're interested. I think it was interesting to hear from members of the community that there is interest in the community. There's recognition in the community about this and interest in it.
And I think that when you start looking at some of those things in the concerns column, even those who were at the public meetings who were very positive have heard that no more taxes thing and want to be able to say the library is using your tax dollars efficiently and be able to say that, talk about the efficiencies in the project and green features,
Yeah.
but not green features at the cost at a high dollar value.
No, I think the other concerns that you see listed here, many of these are fairly relatively easy design issues to address moving forward. The exact location of the stair, how do we deal with wind at the entry, stormwater storage, things like that. Those are things that we can certainly address fairly easily in progressing the design. Public parking capacity, we know is a concern. We've known that's a concern. It was, confirmed again for us here tonight. The question of cost, whether it comes up with, what's the cost of the curved facade, or what's the cost of the project in general. We know that the issues of cost are going to be a primary factor in this as we go along. So we're going to have to be able to address that in a very specific way. There was at least one person at the meeting who was just simply surprised that there isn't more interest in the community in what's going on at the library and what the library is considering doing here. And how do you get that word out? I mean, there's a group of people who come to the meetings and are aware of it, who visit the library, they're aware of what's going on, but they're surprised by how many people they talk to in the community who just don't know anything about what's going on. So, and I think that's, that was one person's opinion, but I think it's one of those opinions that is really important to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think it's borne out anecdotally.
Yeah. So, and then the no more taxes issue that we talked about. So before I move on to the second part of our presentation, I'll keep that part brief. Before I move on, those who were at the meeting, is there anything you'd like to add, or does it feel like I captured this fairly accurately as far as what was said at the meeting?
I think you did.
Okay.
I just have one question.
Sure.
When you talk about the brick,
Yep.
we're getting an image, you mentioned the word common brick. I don't know whether what we know as common brick
Go back to
is
the
what
phone.
other people know as common brick.
Yes.
I mean, I'm from Chicago.
Yes.
In the city of Chicago, common brick was brick that didn't last as well. It kind of looked like it was half chipped away.
It's the stuff you put on the back of the building that nobody can see.
That nobody can
Yes,
see,
yes.
exactly.
No, and now
So it's
you
not
go-
desirable.
Right, and now you
But
go into trendy restaurants and they're exposing it all on the
I
inside.
hear you.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think, again, maybe it depends on someone's age as to
All right.
whether they think it's warmer or
So here,
cheaper.
let me see if I can explain this more clearly. If you look at the brick that's in the building on the right and the two buildings in the center, if you look at the edges of the brick, they're very crisp and clean, and you'll notice this when you walk down the street. One of the problems with doing a building project like this, you're gonna start to walk around and notice things you never looked at before. But the bricks, they all have a very sharp edge look, right? And that's typically, there's a different manufacturing process for that. than there is from doing bricks like you see in the building in the center here. So I realize it's a little, you know, the photographs taken from a distance, a little hard to see, but I think even at a distance, you can see how there's a little more texture to the surface of the brick. It's because that brick is molded. So each brick is put into a mold, it's molded. When it comes out, it has kind of softer edges, not fully rounded. There's an almost handmade type quality to it.